Hi, Paul Masetta here, and I am extremely excited to be sitting with Steve G. Jones, clinical hypnotherapist. Steve is the creator of the largest set of hypnosis recordings on the planet, and he is also pursuing a doctorate in education, which makes him extremely qualified to deliver information because he understands the way people process and learn information. And so we're really excited to pick his brain and kind of understand what it takes for people to do from a mindset perspective to attain wealth. Steve, welcome.
Paul, thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you.
Thank you.
So the first question that I always ask people are, and granted that you are a master of the mind and you're a decorated hypnotist, but Steve is also a self-made millionaire as well. And so can you tell us what is, in your opinion, is the first thing that someone needs to do to become wealthy?
Well, the first thing someone needs to do is work on their mental state. They've got to take it to a subconscious level. When we look at the mind, what we see is it's kind of like an iceberg. You know, what you see in an iceberg is a little bit at the top, but the majority of it is below the surface. Or when we think about a tooth, you know, people get a tooth pulled and they're surprised to see how big the tooth is because the majority of it, the roots, are below the surface. So we look at that and we realize that that's actually the bigger part. It's also the most important part. So the first thing someone needs to do to become wealthy is acknowledge how important it is to look below the surface at the driving force. What's really driving you? You know, when you get up in the day and you do certain things, if you look at someone who's wealthy versus someone who's not, they've both got the same amount of time in the day. They're both doing things in the day, but they're doing different things. They're doing things that are different from one another. And the reason for that is the subconscious mind, that below the surface part, that iceberg part, or the roots of them. That's what's driving them. So the most important thing is to acknowledge that. And once we acknowledge that that's what's driving us to do certain things in the day, certain things that are different than people who are wealthy, then we realize that we can take care of that part of us. It's not so much attempting to force it or attempting to do things that we think would be the right things to do. It's a matter of programming ourselves for success. And when we program ourselves for success, we take care of that underground part, that underwater part, that beneath the surface part, and it drives everything else. So in my expert opinion, the best thing to do is to acknowledge that and start working on that, because that's not just going to make a change for the day. It's not just going to determine what we do today. Oh, today I think I'll do things that wealthy people do, and tomorrow I may not. That's not going to be good enough. What's going to be good enough is changing the way we think in general about our possibilities, getting below the surface, reprogramming that.
Where do these thoughts come from? These thoughts that are buried in the subconscious mind that are kind of holding us back. Where do they come from? Do they come from childhood, parents, society? Where do they come from?
All of the above. They come from all of those sources. So you are, we all are, the end result of all of our experiences. And we think that, you know, maybe our upbringing isn't that important. We think, okay, we had an upbringing that was this way, and I choose to leave that or not think the way my parents thought or what have you. We don't realize how that affects us. We don't realize how we were brought up and how that affects us. You know, my father was raised during the Depression. He was born in 1925. He grew up when times were really tough. And he's passed away now, but during my upbringing, we had to reuse napkins at the dinner table. When guests came to visit, even if they were relatives, they were assigned a napkin. And guests would kind of joke with us. Afterwards, they'd leave and they'd mail my dad a bunch of napkins. They'd say, here you go, Ed, here's a bunch of napkins. He would do things like that. Ketchup, he would put water in the ketchup and shake it up to get every last drop out of it. Things like that. And we think that, you know, maybe that's our past. You know, those are maybe silly things our parents did because they were kind of traumatized by the way they were raised, and that's all in the past. We fail to realize sometimes how that affects us, how that can lead us to poverty-type thinking. We can be trapped in that rut without even realizing it. Maybe we don't add water to the ketchup. Maybe we don't make relatives reuse napkins or things like that because we might think that's silly or excessive. But maybe because of that upbringing, our dreams are limited. Maybe we think that that the universe is not abundant. Maybe we think that our possibilities, rather than being endless, have a roof on them. And we don't realize how that can actually stop us. So the trick is to acknowledge that all of those sources are affecting us, even sources from way back, even our friends. Our friends will talk to us. I read this article one time called The Next Village about how when you get ready to make that move, and you talk to your friends about it, your current friends about it, when you get ready to make that quantum leap to the next level, you talk to your current friends about it, and they say, what, are you crazy? You know, you're going to be at the next level, you're going to be doing this, you're going to be doing that, you're going to be traveling the world, you're going to be wealthy. No, wait a minute now. We grew up with you. You know, you're from the neighborhood. You're from the same area we are. That's not going to happen. They won't say it to you directly like that. They won't directly come at you and give you a lecture about that. But it'll be implied in the things they say. There will be subtle things that they say in their conversation that will be designed to bring you back down, to keep you in the village, if you will. Now, it doesn't mean you have to leave your friends or leave your family or anything like that. It means you have to acknowledge the power that all of those factors that you mentioned have. Family, environment, everything. All of that is constantly having an influence on us. And you know that as the influence master, you know the power of influence. All of that's affecting us all the time, but it doesn't mean that we're up against an insurmountable tsunami that's just going to wipe us out. It doesn't mean that. What it does mean is that we have to program ourselves subconsciously to overcome that.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. Here's my big question for you, and this was something that I'm really excited to ask this question because this is a key part of the program. Steve, tell us how people, give us your 3-step system for people to reprogram themselves. So what would you do? What can people do on their own that you would normally do if you were sitting in a private session with them in your office in Savannah? What can they do on their own at home?
Okay, great question. And so we're looking at 3 actionable steps. What can they actually do? And Mike is the man of action. He's getting it done. He's the guy who will tell you what to do when you hit the ground running, where you're going to run, what you're going to do as you're running. But there are also subconscious steps. And so I'm glad you asked that question. 3 things you can do. First of all, step number 1, acknowledge that the subconscious mind, as we've already talked about, is driving you. That's the biggest part below the iceberg that's really in control. Step 2, you've got to do something about that. What are you going to do? Step 2 is to reprogram yourself. Step 3 is to keep at it. You've got to keep at it. And what that means is that maybe it's not going to work the first time. You know, Mike talks about being comfortable with failure. You've got to get comfortable with messing up and making mistakes and going for it and things not working out and changing course a little bit. Just because you suddenly know how to conquer the world and you're ready to go doesn't mean that you're going to be successful in everything you do, because a lot of your success depends on other people. You've got other people on the planet who are directly involved in your success. And just because you want to do this and you want to have that happen doesn't mean that they're going to do it. Sometimes you've got to change your approach. Sometimes, as I've learned over time, you've got to have more finesse, because I'm the guy who wants to make things happen. I think if I press a button, everyone's going to jump. That's not the way the world works. The world works by people doing things the way that they want to do them. So I had to learn that over time. So that's why step 3 is so important, because you've got to make changes along the way. So step 1 we already talked about. We talked about you've got to acknowledge the subconscious mind. Step 2 is really where I make my living. Step 2 is in reprogramming the subconscious mind. And that gets into huge territory. Luckily, as part of this program, you've got access to some recordings that are going to do that for you. Some hypnosis recordings that are going to do that for you. So I've taken all the guesswork out. But step 2 is reprogramming yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to take all the burden off of you and that we're going to just have Steve G. Jones handle everything. Because there are things that you can do in your waking life that are going to help also. And I'm talking about, rather than just listening to my hypnosis recordings, which you should do, but that's nighttime. You've got the whole day that you can do things. So what can you do? In step number 2, that's where you're reprogramming your subconscious mind, so it involves hypnosis recordings. I believe that's the best way to change. But it also involves changing your self-talk. You know, we don't realize how we talk sometimes. We don't realize that we use the word can't, that we use just negative terminology about our possibilities in general. We say things like, that's
impossible.
Exactly.
Like
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
That's impossible. And we just throw that word out. We throw the word out. That's impossible. And, I can't do that. Or we think to ourselves, what would my friends think if I did that? Or would I lose my friends? Would I ostracize myself from my group of friends? An interesting story that happened to me when I had my office in Beverly Hills, and I was raising my rates from $250 per session to, at the time, $2,500, and now it's even more than that. But I was going to raise my rates, and I talked to another hypnotherapist, and I said, I'm scared. I'm scared to raise my rates. I might lose all these people. And she said, and she told me this story. This other hypnotherapist said, there's a hairstylist who was afraid to raise his rates from $50 to $100 because he would lose, all his customers. And he went ahead and did it, and he hasn't missed any of those customers because his new customers are paying him twice the amount. Now, that's not to say that he doesn't care about those people. That's not to say that he was doing it to be rude. He just started valuing his time more. And so he was able to make that quantum leap. He was able to look at himself as someone who was worth twice as much. Because really, the more popular you become, the more things you do, the more things will be thrown at you, the more valuable your time does become. And so spending time with an individual takes you away from working with a large group of people or making a powerful program like this that's going to reach thousands of people. So if someone wants your time individually, that becomes worth more. You've got to start valuing yourself more. And so you will lose some of those clients. Well, we take that and we put it into our everyday lives, and we see people who are afraid. They're afraid to take the next step, whatever it is. They're afraid that they're going to lose their friends. They're afraid that the people they hang out with aren't going to be able to relate to them anymore if they buy a certain car, or if they live in a certain neighborhood, or if they start hanging around with other people, or start talking about money in a certain way. They're afraid that they're going to lose those people. Well, that's not what happens, because friends are friends. True friends stay with you for your lifetime.
Sure.
And what you do is you set the standard. You say, okay, I'm up here now. Come on up. You want to know how to do it? Here's how I did it. And Paul, I think you're a great example of that, because I've seen you develop over the years. You're the influence master. Paul, you used to be a guy who was in a job and you didn't like it. You didn't like it, and you saw people like me, and you saw other friends of yours, and you said, I want a piece of that. I'm that guy. And you were the guy who was helping us do sales campaigns, and in you, I could always see that for years. I could see that spark in you, and you had the influence. You have always been the influence master. It's just suddenly you kind of opened your heart up to the world, and you said, yeah, here it is. I'm not scared anymore. Here it is.